Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of To The Point podcast. Everybody's doing well today. What a morning. As you can see, I'm not in my normal confines here. I am actually in my parents' loft because of the power breakdown this morning. The Rogers internet being down across the world. So I had no access to internet down there because it's connected to Rogers. And I'm like, well, the rents they have Bell. So I'm up here sitting on the couch, as you can see behind me of the shoulder. Sorry, there's the Alex Ovechkin cutout. That is back to my young days. My father got that for me. I was 7 or 8 years old. Ovi was my favorite player, one of my favorite players growing up. Taves and Ovechkin. But this is going to be the look for today. It's actually good lighting in here. It looks. I think it looks pretty good. But bear with me today. I do want to. There's just so much. I was like, well, there's no internet. But last night was such an entertaining draft. I found it so compelling. There was a number of moves today in the National Hockey League, and I wanted to touch on a lot of different stuff. Walker Campbell was supposed to join us, but the internet situation everywhere seems to be a problem. So I think it's just going to be me today. We'll see if we can battle through this. Again, bear with me with my sound and everything like that, because I don't know how it's going to appear to you guys, but hopefully it sounds good. You can hear me and everything is kosher on that front, because again, I don't have my normal setup, my normal background, my mics, things of that nature. We're just doing it on the fly here today, and hopefully it works out. But what a draft last night. And of course, we're into rounds 2 to 7 today. A lot of picks are being made on the fly as each team just battles through to get through the next couple hours. And I'm reluctant to give winners and losers today. I'm not going to say winners and losers based on draft picks. I think that's a lazy way to look at. I do have certain players that I like more than others, of course, just like everybody else. But I can look at how teams ended up in certain spots and how, different trades they made last night that I find really compelling. And then teams that could have had that same opportunity and just didn't get there. And I want to start. We'll start with number one. Today, we're talking about the Montreal Canadiens. The draft was in Montreal last night, and Montreal was the star of the show. The Montreal Canadiens had a long intro, a lot of thank yous to start the draft. That was driving me nuts. Not as long as the Arizona Coyotes making a draft pick, but again, long nonetheless. But Montreal knew they had to make a splash. They have a new general manager. They have a new president of hockey operations. This is their first draft. This is the first live draft in some time. And I love the way Montreal approached it last night. I've been saying for weeks, even for the last couple months, I don't think the Montreal Canadiens needed to blow up their roster. This team is too good to say, okay, we need to trade Anderson. We need to move off all these pieces. They were in a cup final a year ago. They had a disastrous season. And what I'm saying can all be made moot if Carey Price does not come back healthy. But I still look at this roster and I like it. It's competitive. You add a couple pieces. You add a dynamic player, which Montreal has been searching for forever. This team can do some things. So they get to number one last night. And I fully expected them to take Shane Wright. And I mentioned how I didn't think Shane Wright was the right pick. I think Slafkovsky's got a much higher ceiling. He can be a special talent. For a guy that he's from Slovakia, English is not his first language. This guy's got a lot of charisma. I like the cut of his jib, so to speak, to get all old school on you guys. And Montreal stuns me. With the first pick, they take Slafkovsky. And what was so funny is they take a left winger. There was not another winger taken until the 14th pick in the draft. So Montreal goes completely off the board with the number of centers that were going last night, which is just crazy. I mean, it's a position you search for in high demand. But they take the left winger, the big body who's got an elite shot. And to me, this was the right selection for Montreal. Montreal has a Nick Suzuki who is a carbon copy of Shane Wright. And what I think Montreal would have did last night by taking Shane Wright and having Nick Suzuki on the roster is they would parallel their team to the New Jersey Devils, who had the second pick. New Jersey has Nico Hischier. They have Jack Hughes. Jack Hughes is a more skilled offensive player, but I do think the two are closer together skill-wise, point-wise, and their ceiling to a guy like Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid. You go around the league, those two guys are closer to 80-point guys than 100 points. Jack Hughes might get better than that. He might surprise some people, but I don't see it happening. So then I'm looking around. I said, okay, you take Slavkovsky. He's a winger. He brings some value. But I did think Montreal was going to make another splash. And at first, you start to see Shane Wright dropping, which we'll get to. And he's falling and falling. And then they're making a pick right around the 4 slot. And I'm like, holy shit, they're going to trade up and get Shane Wright too. But I was wrong about that. What they do is, I got the trade right here. They traded Alex Romanov, I like, and pick number 98 in the draft for pick number 13, which belonged to New York Islanders. So Romanov is now a member of the New York Islanders. As I mentioned, I like him a lot. He had a tough season in Montreal, but who didn't? I expect him to bounce back. We've seen the development of defensemen in Long Island. Noah Dobson had a fantastic season. You look at the guys that have really come from nowhere. Adam Pelech, Scott Mayfield. The Islanders breed guys that get good contracts that have long careers. And to me, Romanov can find his space there. They just lost Barry Trotz, obviously, as a head coach, but they got a sound system there. And with the other young defensemen, with the young pieces they have in place, I expect it to be a good fit for Romanov moving forward. But then Montreal trades pick 13 and 66 to Chicago for Kirby Dach. This was a good move by Montreal. They have so many draft picks. You can only make so many picks. If you remember, you can only have 50 roster players. So you can't draft all these guys and then have other players. Like, there's only so many guys you can have under contract at the AHL and NHL level. And you look around and say, well, Kirby Dach, he's been a little underwhelming at the National Hockey League level, which I completely agree with. But you know what you have in Kirby Dach. He went number 3 overall for a reason. And for Montreal to say, okay, Shane Wright, we like him, but we don't think he's going to be a great center iceman. And Dach, he's available. We can take a great winger and then pick up a center that could be as good or better than Shane Wright, because it's no guarantee to me that Shane Wright's going to be a great NHL player. He might play for 10 years, but we're talking about Hall of Famers with the number 1 overall pick. You want a game changer. You want somebody that's going to light up your franchise for generations to come. I don't think Shane Wright has that high-end potential. So you get Dach, who gets to fit into that mold. You get Slavkovsky. They can play together. I love the fit. Because now you have Suzuki and Dach up front. Josh Anderson can be your third-line center if you need him to be. He plays wing, but he can play center. I don't know why they don't play him at center more often, but you have options. That's the key thing here, is you have a more dynamic team. You have more avenues to go down where you can say, okay, we have Dach, we have him, Anderson. We can throw, Yoar on the line. Montreal was too one-sided. You look at their lines, they now have Gallagher. They just have a better team today than they did yesterday, and that's all you can really ask for. So I like the move by I love the night by the Montreal Canadiens. They pick another Slovakian kid at 26, Nisar, and it was just a really good draft to me. They did good business. They didn't overpay. They give the 13th pick to Long Island. Then they get the 13th pick from Long Island. Losing Romanov hurts, but what I would say to that is they have Caden Gooley coming up. They have this kid named Jordan Harris who's playing NCAA hockey right now. So they have other defense that they need to hope can push through. Caden Gooley, to me, is a guy that could potentially play at the NHL level next year. He's a very good player. Played with the Edmonton Oil Kings this year, was in the Memorial Cup, if you recall, just a few months ago. So he's a guy that is very much high ceiling. He's a physical player. He skates extremely well, and a guy that they took in the mid-teens of a draft, but I think they look at him as a top 4 defenseman at the NHL level in the very near future. So I love the night for the Montreal Canadiens. Now let's look to a team that it's hard to say this is a win because your team got significantly worse. But what I credit the Chicago Blackhawks with last night is committing to a rebuild. Stan Bowman and the group in Chicago would always stay around the edges, would always say, well, are we competitive? No, we're rebuilding. Yet you have these big contracts. You have guys in your roster where you know damn well you won't finish in the bottom 3. You won't be available to get a top-notch player that can rejuvenate your franchise in 3 to 4 years. Well, last night, Davidson, the new general manager, and the brass in Chicago said, screw being in the teens, screw being mediocre. We need to sell. And they did. It started right after I finished the podcast yesterday, where I thought DeBrincat would go to New Jersey, but it was Ottawa that pulled the trigger. It's a good, and I'll talk about it, but Chicago trades Alex DeBrincat for the 7th overall pick last night and the 39th picks to Ottawa. So DeBrincat goes to Ottawa, 7th and 39 goes to Chicago, and DeBrincat is now an Ottawa Senator. He has 1 year left until restricted free agency, and then he's a year away from unrestricted free agency. And at this point, there is no contract signed. So they traded for DeBrincat, knowing there's a little risk there. There could be a contract dispute. Maybe he doesn't want to remain in Ottawa. But nonetheless, I respect the fact that they're being aggressive. They're tired of being a doormat in the National Hockey League. I look at the deal for Chicago. So at the 7th pick, they get Kevin Chorsinski from Seattle. I think looking at the way the draft went last night, I do think they had to move up to get him because, defense were going early and often. I didn't expect Simon Nemec to go second, but in my mock draft, I had Korchinski going 10 to the Anaheim Ducks, and the Anaheim Ducks draft good defensemen. That's just what they do. They took my namesake today in the 2nd round, Noah Warren, stud defenseman, believe you me, at 42. So they just know how to draft, develop really good D-men, turning them into great players. Look at Jamie Drysdale. Look at Shea Theodore. Cam Fowler when he was much younger. These guys, they produced some really, and they had Scott Niedermayer there. He's working with the defense now. So that tells you all you need to know. So I do think for Chicago, Davidson got interviewed last night on Sportsnet, and he said Korchinski was our guy, and we felt we were going to miss out on him if we didn't do this. I agree the way the draft went. DeBrincat is a point-per-game player. He is extremely good. Again, he's a 40-goal scorer. I think he's more of a 30 to 35. We'll see how he plays without Patrick Kane. And that's a big thing here is he's played with Pat Kane since he came into the league. They've had great chemistry. They play phenomenal together. And I do think he'll still be a very good player because I think Ottawa is going to try very hard in free agency to provide a good center iceman for DeBrincat so that they can score goals and continue to have success. But I look at Chicago, it's a bit light for me. And I understand that you get the 7th overall pick, and DeBrincat was a pick in the 3rd round. So if you look at it that way, it makes some sense. You get a 7th pick and then 39th, which is an early pick in the 2nd round. So it's a little bit light for me at the surface. But we have to wait and see on this trade because this could be a good deal for both sides. If Chicago gets a defenseman that is on the roster for a decade, like a Duncan Keith, like they've had with Keith and Seabrook, then the trade doesn't look as bad. Then it makes a whole lot of sense for this team where, you trade a winger, but you get a great defenseman. I'd rather have a great defenseman for a decade than have a great winger. That's an easy trade for me. So the trade, we need to wait and see how this kid develops, what he turns into. But on the surface today, it looks a little light because you don't see, there's nothing tangible Chicago can say. Okay, we got the 7th overall pick that we think is going to be good, but there's no definitive sign. There's nothing that says, okay, this guy is going to be a special player. This guy is a lock to be great. So for Blackhawk fans, I do think there's a little, what do we get ourselves into? We just lost Alex DeBrincat, and I'm sure there's a little frustration today for some Blackhawks fans saying, we're going to stink next year, the year after. Yeah, you are. Brace for it now. But again, for Chicago, you trade DeBrincat, and then you trade Kirby Dach, and you get picks 13 and 66 for Kirby Dach. And with the 13th pick, they took Frank Nazar from the U.S. National Development Program. So again, another guy you're going to have to develop. We're going to have to wait and see. And obviously 66 today, which was a third-round pick. I'll pull that up for everybody. So I was watching it a bit before I came on came here today, just seeing where everybody goes, and some of my favorites where they ended up going. But it's very much it's undecided right now. That's all we can really say about these trades. Dach, I think, can be a good player in Montreal. He has had some injury history. He does have some red flags that would say, I'm not sure. But for Chicago, you're blowing it up. You're completely blowing up. You're starting from scratch. And that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And the far more interesting thing for me, okay, you move to Brinkat. I like the look of Ottawa. They need to do something in free agency. I hear Claude Giroux. I'm not the biggest Claude Giroux fan. I don't like signing mid-30s for big money and expecting them to be great. I think that's a bad way to really push yourself forward. Colorado decided not to go Claude Giroux's direction. They won a Stanley Cup. That's not lost on me either. Florida was swept in the second round. So is there another center you can go out? I mean, there's only so many guys that are going to be willing to go to Ottawa. Could you get Scheifele? I would still kick tires on that option because I like Scheifele a hell of a lot more than I do Claude Giroux. And also for Ottawa, I would kick tires on a Pierre-Luc Dubois. Again, I have to have a sign and trade done because I do not trust Pierre-Luc Dubois one bit to stay anywhere because the guy is as flaky as a drug addict without heroin. The guy is just one day he's happy, the next he wants to get the hell out of there. So I would look at Winnipeg and really start to pry at what they want to do. Do you want to move any of these centers? Both guys are a year away from unrestricted free agency. Both guys could leave your franchise for nothing. Hey, we want them at the start of training camp so we can be competitive this year. We can push for the playoffs this upcoming season. So I'd wait and see, but I'd be making those calls now as we head into unrestricted free agency starting on Wednesday. So that's something for Ottawa I would look at. But for Chicago now, the intrigue is Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. Both men are a year away from unrestricted free agency, and both guys are in very different parts of their career. Patrick Kane is still one of the best players in the world. His age be damned, the guy just produces year in, year out. He rarely has an off season. He rarely has off games. He's just a consistently great player. He's the best American-born NHL player of all time, and the guy's just a flat-out winner. His agents, Pat Brisson, declined to comment on what Patrick Kane was going to do now that DeBrincat, Kirby Dach, basically their whole core is gone. Not to mention they took on a really bad goaltending contract in Peter Mrazek later in the night. But no comment from Kane. I'm not surprised with that. But seeing the team that you're going to have around you changes things. For Patrick Kane, I understand the love for Chicago. I understand that you have roots there. I'm not sure if he has kids or not. I don't think he has kids, but maybe he does. Anyway, you love Chicago. But not everybody gets to go one place their whole career. Tom Brady didn't. Scott Niedermayer didn't. You bounce around. You end up going to different places, and sometimes you can have success there. You need a different opportunity. Chicago is going through a full rebuild. and they're going to be terrible this year. But Patrick Kane, again, hinders your chances of getting the number 1 overall pick next year. I have a hard time believing Chicago can be worse than Arizona, but who knows? Who knows? And again, there's a draft lottery, so you can get some luck in there too. But for Chicago, I would be telling Patrick Kane, I'd be telling Jonathan Toews, what's it going to take? If you're Chicago and Toews is willing to waive, eat half his contract, so you eat 50%. I think a team would take Jonathan Toews at half that money, making 10 and a half. So you make half of that. You take a Jonathan Toews. I think you can give you half of that production. He's not a $10.5 million player anymore, but I'd take a flyer on him. If I'm trading Patrick Kane, I'm not retaining anything. I'll retain some salary if I get more in the deal, but Patrick Kane is still worth $10.5 million. He's still that good of a player. And I've been pumping this forever. I'm not going to stop until this player ends up on the team. Patrick Kane and the New York Rangers are just too good of a fit. It makes too much sense for Patrick Kane. He has to go there. The team got so close this year. They're great. And if you have to move out Artemi Panarin to get Patrick Kane, do it. Artemi Panarin is not a player that's going to win a Stanley Cup. The guy quits. The guy doesn't go into corners. The guy the juice isn't worth the squeeze with Artemi Panarin. How a guy like Gerard Gallant still has Artemi Panarin on his roster is puzzling to me, because the guy is so fucking frustrating to watch play. Because you can just tell he doesn't care. He's not willing to buy in. He's not willing to fight for that ultimate prize. Patrick Kane will. He's proven it year after year after year. New York will not be the only team that will call if he's available. Believe me, half the league will do what they have to do to get Patrick Kane. But New York is the team for me that makes the most sense. They can figure out the cap. They can save money by not signing some big contracts and trade for Patrick Kane. They have the assets to do it, and they have a team that could win a Stanley Cup next year. With last night's events, to me, this story is still very much alive, and it's in the air. It's percolating, because loyalty is one thing, but Chicago is moving in a different direction. The people that brought you into the league are gone. They're finished. They're flushed. They're not in the league anymore. You need to move your career forward. You need to put yourself in a situation to win, because that's what you are, a winner. Even push the goalpost back even more on the discussion of who's the best American-born hockey player ever. To me, it's not even close. It's Patrick Kane. But make sure the next generation knows, hey, this is my fucking show. And if you want to be as good as me, you're going to have to work really, really hard for it. So that's where I see this going. I see more activity from Chicago this offseason, because why would two all-time great winners stay on an organization that they know going into the season is not going to win anything? That they know going into the season is likely going to have one of the top 5 worst records in the National Hockey League. I don't see why either guy would. Unless Toews wants to retire after this season, retire a Blackhawk, I can understand that. You want to pull a Ryan Getzlaf, walk off into the sunset, there's merit to that. I understand that. Patrick Kane, I don't see retiring. I still think he has a passion for the game. He still wants to win. I expect Patrick Kane to be moved before training camp. And I might throw a live bet on Patrick Kane ending up in the New York Rangers, because I've been talking about it too much. We'll wait and see. But Chicago was interesting last night, and they're still one of the more interesting teams for me this offseason with what they've done, what they could do, and how much this organization could change fundamentally. And Seth Jones stay, like, they got a lot of decisions to make on how their future is going to go, and what they look like in a couple months. It could be drastically different than what it looks like right now. So that was interesting. Now, a team that I thought could have had a great night, that I thought, you go into free agency and you could have had a great winger. New Jersey, I'm thinking, okay, Montreal's going to take Shane Wright. You can take Slavkovsky. You got 2 centers. I think they're going to do their damnedest to sign Johnny Gaudreau. I would not do this, especially for the money he's going to want. I see him getting at least $10 million on the open market, which is crazy. There's no way I'm giving him that type of money, but somebody will, and somebody like New Jersey for sure will, because they're desperate. And not to mention, I thought they could end up with DeBrincat. And I thought DeBrincat is a better option than Gaudreau because he's a hell of a lot cheaper. He's not a good of a player. Don't get me wrong. He isn't. But he also is a great goal scorer. He could fit with those centers. You have two wingers and you have two centers. You have two lines that you can throw at guys. Still going to figure out net minding, but your team is going in the right direction. But the end of last night, I'm looking in New Jersey with the second pick takes Simon Nemec. I don't blame them taking a defenseman because I remember I said to my parents, I was watching the draft with them, Shane Wright is basically what they have on their roster. Jack Hughes, to me, he's closer to Shane Wright is closer to Nico Hischier than he is Jack Hughes. But they have 200-foot centers that are safe in their own zone, make good decisions, but aren't going to blow you. You're not going to watch a game and go, wow, that guy's a great player. They're just there. They're sound defensively. They're smart. They got great hockey IQ, all the intangible stuff. And I'm looking around. I'm looking at my boards. I'm like, well, Cooley's there, but he's something similar. Maybe they want to take Cutter Gauthier. He's a winger / center, but they go at Nemec. And for New Jersey, this was a pick for need. I do think Nemec is a good player, but I don't like making picks for need. I like taking the best player available. What they could have did is took Shane Wright and flipped him. That's something I thought at the time. You could draft him. Okay, you have 3 centers. You could trade Shane Wright last night on the draft floor to a number of teams. Seattle clearly wanted him because they got on the podium and made the pick in about 0.5 seconds. So Seattle, okay, you're not a great team yet, but you got somebody we want. Another team might really have coveted him. Maybe Philly, they're desperate. They make bad decisions a lot. You could have tried to take advantage of a team for being desperate and saying, okay, the number 1 pick is still available. We can have him, and you can try to make something work. But for New Jersey, you take Simon Nemec. You got to hope he can turn into a great defenseman on the back end. I don't expect him to play NHL minutes this year, but for him, he's from Slovakia. He can play in the American Hockey League if the Devils want to. If he wants to, he can also go back and play overseas. But there's options for him where he could be playing in North America, and that's something to me that has value for a pick like this. Play in the AHL, play against men, learn the North American game, and you're also very close to the NHL team. And if they want to call you up at the end of the year, they want to have you on the team midway through the season. You're so close. They've seen you. They have you. When there's a guy in Slovakia, there's a guy overseas, you got to finish your season. Then you got to come over, go through your visa issues. It's a long, long procedure to get you there. And then the season's basically over. So if you're close to the team, that's what I recommend. Europeans have that advantage. If you're a CHL player, you cannot play in the American Hockey League. You have to go back to the CHL, and you cannot be called back up after being sent down. So you are very much stuck. You cannot play another NHL game that year. You're playing CHL, and then you're done. You're done. Until the next season, the team cannot even think about playing you. You are moot. You're done. In NCAA, you can play out your season. Then you can sign with the team at the end of the season. You can play in the playoffs. You play for a team that's going to miss. You have that option. So NCAA is still pretty strict too, because you can only play a few games before you get to the end of the season. But as you recall, Cale Makar played an entire season in the NCAA. He won the Hobey Baker Trophy. They got beat out in the Frozen Four, and he was on the Colorado Avalanche's roster playing in playoff games in the same season. So that's why I always say these Euros, the NCAA kids, it's a better route than it is to play in the CHL. And I don't like to put down the CHL, in particular the Q, because it's close and I've watched the hockey. It's very good. But do I think it's the best path to get to the NHL? If you if you're a good player, if you're taking in, we're talking about first rounders here. You have to have that inner belief that you could play in the NHL as soon as next season. And in the CHL, if you're cut from camp, you don't have that ability. To me, a guy like Mason McTavish, who played a few games with Anaheim beginning of last season, he was on the draft floor last night for Anaheim. He's a guy that could have played NHL games last year. I think Anaheim would have liked to see him play a few games with a guy like Ryan Getzlaf at the end of last season before he retired. But he couldn't because he was playing for the Hamilton Bulldogs and he was playing in the CHL. So you don't have the ability to say, Mason, please come do this. No, he's in the CHL. You can't touch him, and he's not available to you until 2022, 2023. So for Simon Nemec, this is an opportunity for him to play North American hockey and potentially get into NHL games as soon as next season. But for, like I said, for New Jersey, to me, it's a tough night. Could have Slavkovsky. You could have made a trade for DeBrincat, especially with New Jersey again. Chicago ended up the 7th pick. Ottawa had the 7th pick. I would not have traded the 2nd pick if Slavkovsky was there for DeBrincat. But looking back, I would have traded the 2nd pick if I was confident I wasn't getting him. If I knew I could have gotten DeBrincat, to me that would have been worth the value. Again, Nemec is a very good player. They got to hope he's a pillar on their back end. But to me, DeBrincat would have been the better choice to get other than Nemec in that situation. So that's something they may look back at and say, for New Jersey, they're still in a similar position. I'm going to get to the goalie carousel later in the show, but I look at their roster and they're still missing a lot up front. They're still missing a goaltender, and is Dougie Hamilton a whole lot of ifs on the back end as we currently sit here. Other news last night, before we get to the goalie carousel, which continues to happen across the National Hockey League. Arizona takes Logan Cooley with the 3rd pick. This was interesting because obviously a storyline of last night in the first hour was Shane Wright and how he fell to number 4 to Seattle. And what was really telling to me was that Arizona, and again, Arizona is not known for being a smart organization, basically the Arizona State University Coyotes with their 5,000-seat barn, but they took the guy that they had scouted the most. Arizona knew they had the 3rd pick, and they knew Slavkovsky or they knew Wright was going to go likely 1-2. New Jersey threw a wrench in. Montreal threw a wrench in, you could say, taking Slavkovsky instead of Shane Wright. And to me, Arizona said, we know Cooley a hell of a lot better than we know Wright. We're going to stick with the guy we know. He's a guy that played for the U.S. National Development Program. He'd be closer to home. I guarantee you their scouts have watched him more than they did Shane Wright. And it just tells you what scouts making these selections saying, okay, we know Cooley better than we know Wright. Yes, Wright was the higher touted prospect, but this is our guy. We expect him to be there. He's there. Okay, yes, there's another shiny object over here, Shane Wright, exceptional status, the great OHL player, but we're going to stick with who we know, if you will, which is fascinating because, and this happens in every sport. There's times where you go, why didn't they pick that guy? Why is this guy falling? And their teams, I think, and I've never been in a draft room, but I think about it a lot. You have your guys, and if you're a scout and I know Logan Cooley, you're looking at the GM saying, please trust me. And these scouts get competitive, and they talk about, well, I scouted him. I want our team to take him for when he turns out to be a stud pick. I can be like, haha, that was me. I found him. And I find that fascinating. I'm sure Shane Wright was a little happy that Arizona didn't take him if he had an honest moment. But Shane Wright goes to Seattle, and this was obviously a tough night for him. You saw his face as he continued to drop. He was really frustrated, expected to go 1. I do think this is good fuel for him. He goes to Seattle. They're a new franchise, and you got Ron Francis there. I don't expect them to be a great team, but he is a guy in this draft that I think is a lock to play in the NHL next Shane Wright's not going back to Kingston. I look at the picks here. I think Slafkovsky will play in the NHL next year for the Montreal Canadiens. I expect Shane Wright to play in the NHL next year for the Kingston Frontenacs. I think there's an outside chance David Jiricek, the defenseman for the Columbus Blue Jackets, taking 6 plays in the NHL next year. I don't expect Marco Kasper to play. There's a few other guys I could, there'll be somebody that comes out of nowhere that makes a team, but nobody jumps off the page. I see a few guys. Cooley in Arizona may get to play, although I believe he's going to school. So he'll be going to school next year, so unlikely. But for Shane Wright, it's a good situation. Not a lot of media. Slafkovsky comes in with a huge chip on his shoulder, being the number 1 overall pick. You're playing in a big media market with a team that hopes to significantly improve next year. So he'll have a lot of pressure coming over from playing in Europe. But for Shane Wright, it's a good landing spot. It's a stable organization, and you can hope to improve your play, and just become a better hockey player, playing with the likes of Matty Beniers, who spent last year playing with Owen Power, last year's number 1 overall pick at the University of Michigan. So Philly takes Cutter Gauthier. As I mentioned, Columbus takes David Jiricek, Korsinski. Couple picks I love. Detroit at number 8 takes Marco Kasper from the played in the Swedish Hockey League last year, and he's an Austrian kid. To me, this is so Detroit. I thought for sure they'd take a defenseman, although the defensemen were taken. You had Korsinski gone by then, Jiricek, and Nemec. I had Nemec going to Detroit in my mock draft. So all the top 3 defensemen in these drafts are gone, and Detroit decides to take Marco Kasper. And he's a project. He's a really good 200-foot player, but he's got great compete, and I trust Detroit when they make a pick. But I also love that Detroit's making another pick on a player that I love. I love Moritz Seider when they took him. We just won a Calder. I mentioned the defenseman yesterday that they took last year, who I think is going to be, I think he might play in the NHL as soon as next season. He's that good. So he's great. I love the Kasper pick. Detroit hasn't made the playoffs the last 6 years. They just made a change at head coach, but they've been drafting extremely well. They've been getting close to the top of the draft, but they get in the top 10 and they make smart selections. And that's so important to improve your team. So Kasper, to me, is a really good pick for the Detroit Red Wings. 9, Buffalo. This is one I did pick correctly in my mock draft. I only got 2 right, to be fair. But Matthew Savoy going to the Buffalo Sabres. He's another one where he's got a lot of talent. I think for Buffalo, you need a difference maker. You took Owen Power last year at number 1. He's your anchor on the back end. I like Savoy a ton. They got a good core of young players in Buffalo with Dylan Cousins and with Casey Middlestat and a number of other guys that I think can push through, that can continue to get better. Matthew Savoy is dynamic. He has a great shot, and he's an offensive-minded guy that is not afraid to shoot the puck, not afraid to demand it. So I like the Matt Savoy pick because I think he's a difference maker, and he's a guy that can have a big effect on Buffalo and just how they're perceived around the league and want to get players to come play in Buffalo again. And my last love pick last night, for me anyway, I like the Kemmel pick. Kemmel fell in the draft. I thought he goes 17 to Nashville, so he took a big fall. I love the Connor Geekie one. Arizona traded up with San Jose. San Jose traded a number of picks to get Connor Geekie, who played for the Winnipeg Ice last year. To me, he's a guy that at 11, he was a guy that stood out to me that didn't go in the top 10. And clearly Arizona agreed that they can get 2 centers in this draft. You get Cooley, who they had scouted all the way, and then you're in a position where you have so many draft picks to trade up and get a Connor Geekie. And for Arizona, the hope has to be you're going to stink this year. That's a given. They still have Jacob Chikrin. Maybe he's on the roster. Maybe he isn't. They don't have stable goaltending. So you're going to be picking likely in the top 5 next year. They picked 3rd this year. You got to hope you can win. But you get a Geekie, you get Logan Cooley, and you get Connor Bedard next year. And they are a joke right now, the Arizona Coyotes. They play at the SEU barn, but they're hoping to build a rink in Tempe. You get a guy that was third overall. You get a Connor Bedard who might be a special talent. You can turn around a franchise pretty damn quick because if you have talent, it doesn't matter what the rest is. It really doesn't because if you remember, the Pittsburgh Penguins were a joke when they took Marc-Andre Fleury, Evgeny Malkin, and Sidney Crosby. The organization was completely falling apart. They were burning. That organization, they were going to have to sell the team. They were going to move the team out of Pittsburgh. It was anarchy. Pittsburgh Penguins were essentially the Arizona Coyotes right now, except Pittsburgh didn't get the love from Gary Bettman that Arizona does. And then they draft a number of key players that changed a franchise, that changed its value, that ended up getting new ownership, gave it completely new look, and they won 3 Stanley Cups in 8 years. That is how quickly That's how quickly it can move because Pittsburgh was all the way down here. You couldn't see their line. They were losing money. They were in the gutter. But you make some really key selections and all of a sudden you're up here. And the Pittsburgh Penguins have now made the playoffs in the most seasons in a row, more than any active team in the National Hockey League. That can happen in Arizona. I have less faith because I look at the guy making the selections last night. He looks like the biggest nerd I've ever seen in my life. He took forever to make the pick. He thanked 80,000 people. He said hello to the fans in Arizona, which I think there's about 5 of them. So I have my worries about Arizona. Don't get me wrong. But Arizona, with these 2 picks this year, I like them both. And if you get some luck next year, draft lotteries are completely unpredictable. But if you can get lucky next year and you get Connor Bedard, you pair him with Logan Cooley, you get Connor Geekie, you have a 1-2-3 up the middle that you can play against anyone. That can change an organization. That's why I wouldn't trade Jakob Chychrun. I'm not saying Jakob Chychrun's a number 1 defenseman, but he can play at the National Hockey League level. He can be a good player. You make a few other selections. You grab a good goalie. You have another good defenseman added to your team. Before you know it, you're not a joke anymore. Before you know it, you have some really good talent. You get a barn that's reasonable. Hopefully fans show up. I don't know why people don't show up in Arizona. Why not? You have great weather. It's one of the best places to live in the whole world, period. I don't live there, but I can vouch for it. I'll vouch for Arizona right now. The weather is impeccable. It's hot all the damn time. The Arizona Cardinals are consistently good. The Diamondbacks show up to watch some sports. Warm weather cities. I get you want to go to the beach and look at the good-looking women and men. I get that. Believe me, I get it. But show up to watch these teams. Arizona can be a really good story in the National Hockey League. How they go from joke to somebody that you can really look at and be proud of. Say, this team did something that we didn't expect. It would be a 30 for 30. There should be a 30 for 30 on the Penguins. And how pathetic. I mean, when they got Fleury, Crosby, and Malkin, that team was pathetic. They were down the drain. They were going to sell the team. They're not thinking about selling the team anymore. Fenway Sports Group, who owns the Boston Red Sox, and LeBron James is tied to it, own the Pittsburgh Penguins now. They're not going anywhere. It can happen in Arizona. It might not, because the president CEO right now, Gutierrez guy last night, I wanted to hit him with a frying pan, but maybe. It starts with the team on the ice. People are only going to show up to watch you play if you're worth going up to see play. Right now, they're not worth seeing. There's only 5,000 seats anyway, but nobody wants to go see old man Phil Kessel on a PTO play hockey. But you get Logan Cooley, you add some really good players to this roster, a few more people might be showing up to the barn. So that could be the case in Arizona and what they do to put themselves back on the map and put themselves back into relevancy in, say, 3 to 5 years' time. It's going to take time, but they can get there. Wait and see. But that's something that can happen. But, a few of my guys last night, Jagger Firkus did not get taken in the first round. He's a player I really liked coming into the season, coming into the draft. He got took the 4th selection today. He was taken. Noah Warren, of course. I'm rooting for that kid. He gets taken by the Anaheim Ducks. I love that he gets taken by Anaheim. Anaheim knows how to develop defensemen, period. They just know. They took Pavel Mitanov from the Saginaw Spirit last night, so they take him at 10. They got Noah Warren. They take Nathan Gauthier from Quebec, from the Quebec Rempart. So I think they had a good night in the draft. But they know how to draft good defensemen. He's a big kid. He needs some work. But I like that he goes to Anaheim and get some really good defense coaches and get some good player development people to work with him. But I found the first round was extremely compelling. I thought it was really, really compelling. There's some interesting storylines. And now let's get to the secondary story, which continued today and it continues to develop, and that's the goalie carousel. It started last night, really right before, as the draft came on the air. It was announced that the Minnesota Wild re-signed Marc-Andre Fleury on a 2-year, $7 million deal. $3.5 million a season. Fleury remains in Minnesota. He will partner up with Cam Talbot, and they will basically be a tandem 50-50 guys. Minnesota, this is a smart move for Minnesota. I don't love Marc-Andre Fleury, as you know. If you listen to me, he's not my favorite goaltender. He's great. I do think he's a little bit overblown what he's done in his career. He's been a starting goaltender technically only once on a Stanley Cup winning team. He gets credit for 3. He was a backup for 2. Let's be honest here. But he is a really good guy, great guy, loved across the league. And in Minnesota, they don't have a lot of cap room. You keep a goalie that you traded for at the deadline, so you lost the first round pick, but you keep the guy that you traded the number 1 the first round pick for. So that's a win. And so I like that. I like the deal. Him and Cam Talbot are both good goalies. To me, Fleury and Talbot is as good a tandem as you're going to get. And when I'm saying tandem, I'm saying, Vasilevsky is better than these two, yes. But if you're looking at teams that don't have a number 1 goalie, Talbot and Fleury together is pretty damn good. I'd rather have Talbot and Fleury than, I look around what New Jersey had last year, or I think it's better than Binnington and Husso was in St. Louis. So I like that you have 2 options. Either guy could start a playoff game like they did this past season. And it's a competition the whole year for both goalies to be good, because this team expects to make the playoffs under Dean Evason. They expect to compete for a Stanley Cup, if you ask me, with Kirill Kaprizov and the number of good players. And you were forced to get rid of Kevin Fiala, but you keep Marc-Andre Fleury. So I do think this was a smart deal. I don't think Marc-Andre Fleury is a number one goalie by himself anymore, just the wear and tear and the amount of hockey he's played, but he doesn't have to be with Cam Talbot. Both guys can start 40-plus games. That's a perfect situation for Minnesota. So that's a good piece of business. So that's a win. So it started with Minnesota keeping Marc-Andre Fleury. It then goes later in the night. We're going through the draft, and it's announced as the Leafs get on the clock with pick 25 that they have traded the pick 25 in the draft to the Chicago Blackhawks, and they've also added Peter Mrazek in the deal for pick number 39 or 38. So basically, Chicago gets the 25th pick in the draft, and Peter Mrazek, so that Toronto gets Mrazek off their books. Mrazek was scheduled to make $3.9 million next year and the year after. So basically, this was a salary dump, and Toronto did not have to buy out Peter Mrazek, so they don't have any dead cap on their roster, and they get rid of him. It's a clean break. Kyle Dubas saying he has faith in Peter Mrazek going to next season again was complete bullshit. But what has to be said, and I never heard this on Twitter last night, and of course I didn't, because it was the Leafs reporters talking about it, although they technically work for Sportsnet, but again, that can be intertwined. That can get in the weeds pretty damn easy. This was a good piece of business by Kyle Dubas. Really good piece of business. You get a second-round pick, a high second-rounder, just to point that out, the 7th pick taken today was by the Toronto Maple Leafs. You only have to give up the 25th pick, and that's a late first-rounder, and they don't have a great history of taking late first-rounders. Ask Liljegren, ask Sandin, not many of those guys hit. So you get rid of that. You get rid of Peter Mrazek's deal. What also has to be pointed out, and I never read this last night, is, well, it's a good deal. Well, It is, but you also got to acknowledge you didn't get to take a player in the first round last night because Kyle Dubas signed a really bad contract. That was never brought up. I never read that. There was no story. That was never. It was just, oh, that's a way to go, Toronto, for getting off Peter Mrazek. Well, you wouldn't have had to get off Peter Mrazek if you didn't sign him for a bad contract, and that's completely lost today. I don't understand why you can't have both sides of it, just like I did. I said it's a good piece of business, but at the same time, this business that was good didn't have to be done if you didn't sign the guy to a bad contract. If you didn't have this mountain sitting there and you look at your goalie situation and say, holy shit, we might have Peter Mrazek and Joseph Wall next year. So kudos to Kyle Dubas for getting Peter Mrazek off this roster, but also, impish or admirable, to use the Office reference here, you were impish last summer by signing Peter Mrazek for what he gave you last year. He was terrible. And it's good business, but it's also bad business because you had to, in order to do this good business, you had to give some shit to get to where you are. Toronto now opens themselves up. They're back in the goalie market. You free up a lot of cap. This was a very good deal. I'm not putting down Toronto, but you have to look at both sides of it. And that's something that I don't think I read last night. I never heard it. Of course I didn't hear it. Because why would I? It's objective. That's why you come to me and hear these type of things. Because you're not going to hear it on Sportsnet because they smooch. But good move by Kyle Dubas. And that led us into today, where the goalie market, and there wasn't a big goalie market to begin with because there's not that many great goalies available. Let's be honest here. It is completely on fire. It's completely all over the place. What I mean by that is we look around, and this morning, the New Jersey Devils started the day. They acquired goaltender Vitek Vanacek, who's a goaltender for the Washington Capitals, and the number 46 pick in the 2022 NHL draft from the Washington Capitals in exchange for picks number 37 and number 70. So basically, Washington gets a higher pick in the second round, number 37. They trade number 46, so 9 picks later. And New Jersey gets Vitek Vanacek, who was a tandem goaltender for Washington last year. He started the first couple playoff games against the Florida Panthers and eventually was pulled, and Ilya Samsonov came in the net. And for New Jersey, they add Vanacek, and I'm looking around saying, so what now? They had John Gillies last season. They had Mackenzie Blackwood in net, who they drafted in the first round, who hasn't really never panned out. But if New Jersey, and this is another reason why I said they didn't have a great day, they're going to go into next season with Vanacek and Mackenzie Blackwood. They don't get Slavkovsky. They don't get DeBrincat, and I could see them overpaying for Gaudreau. I went from looking at Tom Fitzgerald really well, and it really could fall apart. To me, this was a deal that doesn't help you long-term. This isn't a deal that necessarily puts you in a position where if you want to compete for a playoff spot, I don't think it does this. Vanacek is an average goaltender. To me, he's more of a backup goaltender. He's not a starter. And okay, New Jersey go with a tandem. You don't trade a whole lot for Vitek Vanacek. But again, he's not a difference maker. He's not a guy that you look at and say, I'm dying to have him on my roster. So New Jersey adds another fringe goalie. They had another goalie that is replaceable level. That's his production. He's okay. He's not somebody that you're super psyched to tell your franchise about. Okay, we got Vitek Vanacek in a trade today. That's not going to happen. That conversation won't be had. But you got to hope that he can be better in New Jersey than he was in Washington. We'll wait and see. But one thing I will say is it's another goalie off the roster, off the page, and it's a team that looks to be set in net. So then about an hour later, this came out of nowhere. The St. Louis Blues traded the rights to Ville Husso to the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for a third-round pick in the draft today. So Ville Husso, who's 27, who had a great season last year, really took over the starting net for St. Louis for Jordan Binnington until the playoffs where Binnington took it back. He had a 919 save percentage and a 256 goals against in 40 appearances last season. Like I said, he didn't have a good playoffs, 890 save percentage, 367 goals against, but he was very solid last year. And just about 30 minutes after acquiring him, the Detroit Red Wings reached a 3-year deal carrying an average AAV of $4.75 million. For 3 year, $4.75 a year for Ville Husso, and he's a big name off the market. Husso, to me, after I saw last night where the Leafs traded Mrazek, they got that money off the books. I expected Ville Husso to become a Toronto Maple Leaf. I really did. I expected him to be their goalie of the future. To me, Jack Campbell to Edmonton makes too much sense. There's a lot of smoke there, and when there's smoke, there's fire. I think Jack Campbell will end up an Edmonton Oiler. So I looked and said, well, who's Toronto going to get? There's only so many guys available. And eventually, Fleury's gone. Vanacek's traded. Husso's there. Campbell's going to go. But Husso is now locked in with Detroit. They have now Nedeljkovic for another season. They have Husso. So I like that tandem. I don't mind that tandem. Detroit's not a good team. I do think they want to be more competitive this year than they were last. But they get him on a 3-year term. It's not a bad contract to have. He's 27 years old, so he's not young, but he's not old either. So they bring him in. And what this does do is I don't expect Detroit to be a great team next year, but what it does do is hurt other teams around the NHL. But it rises the stock of a guy like Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell's not a great goalie. He hasn't been ever in his NHL career. But I mentioned this so many times, and I think this is the key point to think about. You don't have to be a great player. You don't have to be an all-time great. You don't have to be special. You have to be free at the right time. You have to be a free agent when teams want you. You have to be available when the time comes. And sometimes you hit, and sometimes you get a bigger contract than what you deserve. To me, Jack Campbell is going to get overpaid by the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Edmonton Oilers because they simply don't have a choice. If they don't sign a guy like Jack Campbell, who are they going to get? They're going to have to go to Anaheim, who is now in a prime position as well, sitting there. They know they're not going to be good this year, but they got John Gibson sitting there. And they can go, well, you went through free agency and you couldn't get anybody, and everybody's got a home. Well, we got Gibby here. You want him? And I'm sure a team like Toronto or Edmonton, if they don't get Campbell, will go, yeah, we'd like to have him. What do you want for him? Well, it's first-round pick next year. We'll start there, and then we'll go from there. That's how these conversations are going to go. Teams are going to get – the more goalies leave the market before free agency starts, the more panic it's going to set in for these teams to say, what the hell are we going to do here? What are we going to do? How are we going to address this position? Because goalies continue to come off the market. The Washington Capitals are also searching for a goaltender. Washington just lost Vanacek. They lost Samsonov, but they want another goalie to add to their roster. Apparently, teams were kicking tires on Jake Allen. It was reported today Montreal is not going to trade Jake Allen because they're uncertain of the state of Carey Price moving forward, and they want to be competitive next year. So Jake Allen's another goalie not available. So what happens? Darcy Kemper is going to get paid a lot of money too. I look at Washington, I look at the Maple Leafs, and I look at Washington, Edmonton, Toronto. Probably said two of those teams already. But I'm going to throw those three teams in the mix. There's Kemper and there's Campbell. So two teams are going to get these two guys. That leaves one. I don't know who the third team is going to be. But let's say Campbell goes to Edmonton. Because I'm not sure he wants to go back to Toronto. I'm not sure they're going to pay his money anyway. So he goes to Edmonton. There's one. So then there's Washington, and then there's Toronto to get Darcy Kemper. And then the other team that does not get him is going to be in a state of panic. Darcy Kemper to Toronto makes a lot of sense. But Darcy Kemper, I believe, is going to want $6 million. 5.5 to $6 million. It's a lot of money for a guy that I think is an average goaltender. But he knows the position he's in. There's no great goalies available. Ville Husso signed for 4.75. I just won a Stanley Cup. I'm better than him. So if he got 4.75, I want at least another million in him. if not more, because guess what? I can. So to me, Kemper to Toronto makes some sense. But if Kemper goes to Toronto, Toronto is going to pay a backup goalie league minimum. The backup goalie in Toronto is going to be Joseph Wall or Eric Kallgren for the entire season because they won't be able to pay anybody else. For Washington, Kemper would be a good add, but I also think Washington would love to add a second line center with that Backstrom money on long-term IR. To me, Washington and Nazem Kadri, when there's smoke, there's fire. Makes a lot of sense there. I think they'd love to add him to their team. We'll see if they can do it. But there's a lot of intrigue right now. There's a lot of interesting things where this can go. Kemper, you got Campbell, and then I think the team, it's musical chairs. There's 3 teams. There's only 2 goalies. The team that does not get one of these 2 guys is going to look around and say, shit, what are we going to do? Well, you're going to look to Anaheim and make a trade because that's what you have to do. Washington is in a position where they have to. They have to be competitive because they just re-signed Ovechkin. They hopefully to re-sign TJ Oshie. He's a UFA this offseason. Re-sign him. Backstrom's money's freed up. You still have John Carlson on the roster, but we need a goalie. So you need to do what you got to do to be competitive. For Toronto, Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan and Sheldon Keefe, this is it. This is your year to win something. You need to at least win a round. To me, you need to do more than that to keep your job. You lose in the first round again next year, don't even bother having the year-end presser. Your ass is grass. You're done. You're out of that city. You need a goalie that can at least give you a chance going into the season. I look around the league and I don't see another easy trade-off. Those 3 goalies to me, I know Anaheim will move their goaltender. I know they will. I'm not certain any other team is dying to move their goaltender or if the goalie is worth it. If the goalie is available or if the goalie's worth it. I could go down the list here. Antti Raanta is a free agent. If Washington signs Antti Raanta, they're not going any of these teams. You're not winning. Louis Domingue, no. You could offer sheet Jake Ottinger. I mentioned that yesterday. I think Dallas matches it. So I think that's a moot point. David Riddick, like all these goalies are going to be tough. But then you also have Colorado. They're a 4th team. I forgot until right now. They just got Georgiev yesterday. I love their team, but it's going to be worse. And I don't believe Georgiev is a good enough goaltender to win a Stanley Cup. He's never shown it. He's never played well consistently for long periods of time. So, but I like this goalie carousel. I find it really compelling. And to me, this is how the offseason should be. It should be about goalies. It shouldn't be about centers. Because in the NFL, when it's free agency, it's about where the quarterback's going. Is Aaron Rodgers going to be traded? Where's he going to go? Is that going to change where's Russell Wilson going? Does it change the AFC West? Quarterback's the most important position in the NFL. Goaltender is the most important position in hockey. That's how it should work. Where these goalies end up is way more important than when Johnny Gaudreau signs. I know it probably doesn't seem that way right now because Gaudreau is a bigger name. Gaudreau, could have won a Hart this year, but that Gaudreau might end up on a team that misses the playoffs in all likelihood next year. Probably will if he goes to Philly or New Jersey for that matter. But this goalie carousel is fascinating. Maybe there's a curveball I don't see coming. Maybe. Anaheim is an easy solution to me. Detroit, I believe, is not going to move off their tandem. I think they like their tandem. I think they're comfortable with it. There's Matt Murray in Ottawa. But if Ottawa moves up Matt Murray, where do they go? There's not enough goalies to fill all these needs. Adding Matt Murray, I just know if Toronto gets Matt Murray, the city is going to explode into the purge anarchy. It's not going to work. That's why today's episode, Draft Anarchy, well, it's going to be the purge anarchy if Matt Murray's the goaltender for the Toronto Maple Leafs heading into next year after their history of adding goaltenders that get hurt every single year, more than once. So Free agency is next week. Starts Wednesday. I think we'll hear more stuff. But the goaltending situation is fluid, and there's only so many spots to go around for all these guys. There's more business today in the National Hockey League. And let's start with the Flyers. The Carolina Hurricanes traded defenseman Tony DeAngelo, who was going to be an RFA. It was going to be a restricted free agent come Wednesday. So they traded Tony DeAngelo on a 7th-round pick in this year's draft to the Flyers for 3 draft picks. The Hurricanes are receiving a 2022 4th, number 101 overall, a 2023 3rd, and a 2nd-round pick in 2024. In the deal, DeAngelo signed a 2-year, $10 million contract with the Philadelphia Flyers. So DeAngelo had 51 points last year in 64 games. He also had 10 points in 14 games in the playoffs. He was on a 1-year, $1 million prove-it deal with Carolina after being bought out by the New York Rangers after having some issues with teammates in New York. And to me, this is a good deal for Philly. They're a team I don't truly understand where they think they are. They lost Giroux. Couturier is back. Kevin Hayes is clearly on the decline. They got JVR coming off the books. They got to see if Carter Hart can find a career there. They hired John Tortorella. To me, this team believes that they're very close to being a competitive team to make the playoffs. I just disagree with their outlook. I don't believe they're that close to being a playoff team. I don't think they're going to be great next year. I expect them to miss the playoffs again. I could be wrong, but I think they're overlooking what their deficiencies are. I think they're saying, well, we got a few issues that we need to patch the holes. DeAngelo will definitely help their power play. Their power play was one of their worst parts of their game last year. He's a guy that can be just an ace on the power play. Provorov, I'm not sure he's going to love not being on the first unit, but DeAngelo had a ton of success with Carolina. He's a dynamic player, and to me, it's a good little push for Provorov to have DeAngelo come in. I'm not saying DeAngelo is better than Provorov, but I do think DeAngelo is not going to take any shit from him. He's a fiery competitor, and they will go, toe-to-toe when it comes to you earn the ice time that you get. And DeAngelo will come in and provide that spark for the Philadelphia Flyers. For Carolina, this is so Carolina. I mean, you got DeAngelo for a year. He gave you really good value, and you let him walk away. He's a guy I would have re-signed. He's a guy he had such great connection there. You had DeAngelo, you had Slavin, you had Pesce, you had a great back end. And this is one of the big faults with Carolina, and this is one of the reasons why they don't win, why they get close, they make the playoffs every year, but they never win the ultimate prize, is because they're cheap. It's because they bring in new guys every year, but they get close, but they never. You can't gel if guys are coming in and then leaving the next season. To me, DeAngelo is worth that $5 million, especially on a 2-year term. It's not like he went to Philly and got a 5-year pact. He got a 2-year deal. If I'm Carolina, I'm re-signing him. You let other players walk. I keep DeAngelo and let Trocheck, who I'm sure they'll lose too in free agency. You let Trocheck hit, he'll leave the organization. Keep DeAngelo. He's worth that, and what he did for you offensively. And Slavin added more offense last year as well. But again, you partner them, you get those two playing together. They're extremely dynamic. So this is a loss for Carolina. Philly, it's a gain for sure, but they're a team that's not very good that I don't expect to be great next season. So this is just a loss for Carolina to me. I don't understand what their thought process is, and unless you add another great, I don't think you're going to add a better player in free agency on the back end. He fit extremely well. He fit into your culture. Rob Brennemore clearly liked him. And it would be frustrating to work in Carolina because the second you have a good player and he wants to make a little more money, he's gone. But this cheap penny pinching team is competitive every year. I give them credit for that. But you can be competitive every year. If you don't win, it's not worth much. Okay, yes, you're in the public eye. Yes, you can say, well, Brendan Moore's a great coach, and we draft and develop great players. But the teams that are remembered are the teams that win. And sometimes you need to retain some really good talent so your team can remain relevant for many years to come. So I look at Carolina, and I don't love this move from them. It's a stupid one, if you ask me, that they did not keep him. And then later as actually we're doing this podcast, the Nashville Predators traded restricted free agent Luke Cunnin. So Luke Cunnin is a former captain at the World Junior Hockey Championships. He's an American. He's a tough, fast, physical, small forward. He gets traded to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for winger John Leonard and a third-round pick in 2023. So Cunnin was an RFA. To me, it likely means that they didn't have the money for him. He had 13 goals and 8 assists, 22 points while appearing in all 82 games last season. He was coming off a 2-year, $4.6 million deal. He's not a great offensive player by any means, Luke Cunnin, but I do believe he's a guy that can play in a checking line, that can be an extremely important player. He was drafted 15th overall by Minnesota a number of years ago. But I like him as a player. He gives you good effort every night. You know you're going to get that from Luke Cunnin. Again, not a great offensive-minded player, but to me, he found a role in Nashville, and I do think they'll miss him there. But they want to go in a different direction. They just added Ryan McDonough. I'm sure that they want to try to open up some cap room. They're still negotiating with Philip Forsberg, although it does look like Philip Forsberg is going to leave from Nashville. So maybe that's a route. I could also, I'm interested to see Philip Forsberg where he goes. If he leaves Nashville, I don't see him going to a small market that doesn't have good weather, doesn't have some of the amenities that Nashville has. New Jersey is a team that I think would be interested in Philip Forsberg because they didn't get the Brinkat and they didn't get Slavkovsky in the draft. But I'm not sure Philip Forsberg is dying to head to Newark, New Jersey in unrestricted free agency. And then finally, this is other breaking news throughout the podcast today, and that is that Duncan Keith has retired after 17 seasons in the National Hockey League. Duncan Keith, the former Conn Smythe winner, the former Norris Trophy winner, is walking away after signing with the Edmonton Oilers. After being traded to the Edmonton Oilers last season, he's decided to retire. Played in 64 games last year, played in all 16 playoffs games. He signed through next season. He is on a 13-year, $72 million contract. With Keith retiring, the Oilers will free up $5.54 million in cap space, adding to the $3.5 million in space cleared Thursday by trading Zach Kassian to Arizona Coyotes. That's one deal I forgot to mention. With goaltender Mike Smith, 2.2, and Oscar Kleppbaum potentially spending the season on long-term injured reserve, Edmonton could have as much as $22 million to work with this summer. So a lot of money for Edmonton. For that $22 million, some of that is going into goaltending. We mentioned the goalies off the top: Kemper, Campbell, Matt Murray. Edmonton will be spending money on them. Then I expect them to be aggressive in adding another defenseman. Adding a D-man, to me, is imperative for Edmonton because they just lost Duncan Keith. Keith, he's an all-time great player. To me, Duncan Keith's a Hall of Famer. He's a guy that is going to be remembered forever in Chicago for being just so stout, such a great player for all these years. And I give him a ton of credit. He decided to go to Edmonton. He wanted to go there. And I thought he played very well this season. He did all he had to do for this team. He played well in the playoffs when he had to. And, kudos to Duncan Keith. Again, he's going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He had a fantastic career. And for Edmonton, this is a blessing. They traded Kassian last. It's similar to the Leaf deal, where a bad piece of business, but good piece of business, where Edmonton traded Zach Kassian to Arizona. They don't retain any salary, and they trade a pick to get rid of him. So that's a good deal. I thought they'd have to buy him out. They didn't have to. Arizona loves to take bad contracts. They took Nick Ritchie from Toronto last year. They take Zach Kassian. They're practically the same player. So Kassian's gone. Keith is gone. Mike Smith is likely to be on the long-term IR, which is basically he's retiring, but spend the year on long-term IR so that they can move on. And to me, as I mentioned, they need to add a goaltender, and then it's about defensemen. And as I look at the best defensemen available, as I go through the list, there's Justin Braun. He's a very much a depth defenseman. There's obviously Zdeno Chara. Ben Sherratt would be an interesting add for the Edmonton Oilers. Alex Edler is a veteran. But, the big name on the board is John Klingberg. John Klingberg is a hell of a lot better than any guy that's available. I do like Nick Leddy a lot. I do like Josh Manson. He's coming off winning a Stanley Cup. So there are some good names. I mean, there's Subban, Yandel, who I wouldn't be surprised if either guy gets a contract. They're not worth it anymore. But to me, Edmonton has Nurse at 9.5. I would add a defenseman that is can play a whole lot of minute that's smart, like a Duncan Keith. I look at Nick Leddy. I think he could be a really good fit with the Oilers. Josh Manson as well. But to me, Nick Leddy is just a perfect guy to add to this Oilers roster. He's played in so many important playoff series. He's won a Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks in 2010. He's been around the league a long time. He is a veteran, but I just seen him play in the playoffs with St. Louis. He played extremely well. He was playing with Colton Parayko, on a top defense pair, and he's just a guy that has winning intangibles. He's played in big series. He played for the Islanders, but he's an old guy. I thought he was older. I just looked up he's 31. I thought he was older than that. He'll be 32 only in March, and a 32-year-old defenseman. I think you can get Nick Leddy on if you can get him on a 3-year deal to come to Edmonton. That's something I think that would be a smart contract for the Edmonton Oilers, because he's a really smart D. He played in the Islanders in back-to-back seasons, going to conference finals. I mentioned he won a cup, played in St. Louis this year, battled with Colorado to 6 games. So for Edmonton, their 2 top priorities: get a goaltender and then add to their back end. And of course, you can add forwards along the way as well. You have with $22 million in cap space. They do have to re-sign a few players, but I think this gives them the flexibility to open up, to provide a better team. You made the conference final this year, so make your roster better and make a big push for next season to be the year that you break through and ultimately win the Stanley Cup. But for Edmonton, this aggressive time of year. And if I'm one of these teams, not to go back on goalies, but let's do it. If I'm in Edmonton, if I'm a Toronto, I'm aggressive. I'm asking to trade for the rights for a goaltender. If we saw what happened with Ville Husso today, a deal got done pretty quick. If I'm Edmonton, I prefer Darcy Kemper over Jack Campbell, or if I prefer Jack Campbell over Darcy Kemper, I'm making calls to that team and saying, I'll give you a draft pick so that I can get your goaltenders right. So I can negotiate a deal. I can sign him to a deal before Wednesday so that we have a deal done. To me, that's the smart play. There's only so many goalies available. Get your guy in place, and then you go from there. Don't let the system control you. You control the system. Make a deal. It's so important to have your goalie in place, and you feel so much better going into free agency knowing you have security at the most important position. So that's where I think for a team like Edmonton, Darcy Kemper, Colorado said today that they're willing to trade Darcy Kemper's rights. They know they're not going to keep him. That was made clear yesterday when they traded for Georgiev. So with that being said, make the deal. If for every team who likes Darcy Kemper, if you're Washington, you think you really want him on your roster, trade his rights and see if you can get a deal done. For me, Darcy Kemper is going to go to the team that offers him the most money. He just won a Stanley Cup. I do think he wants to compete for another one, but he wants his big payday. He's 31 years old. It's not going to happen again. Same for Jack Campbell. He's in the same age range. Matt Murray, well, he's already getting paid. He's just got to accept a deal somewhere. So do what you got to do. But if I'm a team this weekend, I would make a deal. It could have happened. If I'm a team, I would have wanted it to happen already because you're at the draft. You could have traded a pick today to a team and made it happen. So for all these teams, I think you're behind the 8 ball. Unless you're trading a 2023 pick, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me with what's transpired so far. But really interesting stuff. This can go anywhere. That's the fun thing about it and as I look through the draft now, I'm looking for Marc-Andre Godet. I'm interested to see. He is from El Duane, I believe, or Saint Ignace, and he played this season for the Acadie Bathurst Titans. Then got traded to Chicoutimi this week, and he's cousins with. He's cousins with Luca Cormier, so close to home for here. And I've seen him play. He's a really, really good defenseman. I like him a lot. Just want to see where he ended up going. So I'm going through the players here. If anybody does know and you're listening, let me know because I'm just scrolling through picks. if he did get taken already. I expect him to get taken in the draft. If he doesn't, there's something really wrong here, because I think he. So look here, Maxim Barbashev from Moncton was picked by the New York Rangers, so good for him. He's an interesting prospect. He's went through a couple drafts without getting picked. So Maxim Barbashev goes late in the 5th round, 6th round. He might not have got taken yet. So interesting name to keep an eye on is Marc-Andre Godet. I watched him a lot. I watched him a few times this year. I like the way he plays. I think he can be an NHLer for sure. It doesn't look like he's been taken yet, but I know he was projected to go as high as between the 3rd and 5th round. So he might have fell a little bit. I just want to make sure I didn't miss his name. I don't want to put something out that isn't true. Samuel Savoie got taken from the queue in the 3rd round. Jeremy Langlois, Jordan Dumais, a good player for the Halifax Mooseheads. He got picked by Columbus with the 96 pick. So don't want to bore you with picks, but that's something that I've been keeping. I just want to keep an eye on him, because I watched him this year. He's from close to home, and I think he's going to be a good player and be able to play at the next level. He might be a 6th, 7th round pick. He might be a late guy, but I think he can turn it around and have a good career in the National Hockey League, eventually after, developing some and getting better. Wow. A lot of stuff today. I love it, though. It's interesting. Also today, Novak Djokovic, no surprise, won his semifinal match against Cameron Norrie. He will play Nick Kyrgios for the men's title at Wimbledon Sunday morning. You got Rybakina and Jabber tomorrow morning for the women's titles. Cameron Tringali leads the Scottish Open, the PGA tournament. That's the week before the British Open. So Tringali has a 3-stroke lead, as we said, over Gary Woodland and Tyrrell Hatton. So a little lead for him. The main cats who you expect to be right in contention really aren't. Matthew Fitzpatrick is the last major winner. He's close. Schauffele, who did win recently. Ricky Fowler is 2 under, if you can believe it. But, John Rahm is 1 under. A lot of these great players didn't have great tournaments, so they'll be looking to have some success elsewhere. I know I picked Victor Hovland. He's 6 over. He's going to miss the cut. That was a good pick. Put that in a parlay, and that didn't turn out for me. Going to lose some money on that. So tough day for yours truly when it comes to making money. But hey, I had fun today. I hope you guys did. My digs just for today. And a lot of interesting sports news. That's the big thing. And I expect it to continue. The draft today, keep an eye on that. As I mentioned, it's a big day for these kids, and it's super interesting to see where they end up and things of that nature. So we'll be back Monday. We'll have lots to talk about for sure when it comes to the NHL and the world of sports, and we'll recap the baseball weekend, where I think some really important series will dictate what the future holds for a couple teams, and if they're playoff teams, if they're still in the hunt as we get closer to the All-Star break. So everybody have a great weekend. Take care. Stay healthy. This is to the point.